Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 2025 Sunshine Coast Ocean Festival Nemo Talk series. I'm Suzanne Sanger, the Executive Director of the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association, and I'm joining this Nemo Talk today from Chequilp, also known as Gibsons, at Catsum House Sound, on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. The SCCA, together with our program partner Rhizome Up Media, is thrilled to bring you our 6th annual Sunshine Coast Ocean Festival. This year's events have been made possible through the generous support of our funders that include the District of Sechelt, the BC government, the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition, and a whole bunch of local NGOs, businesses, and individual donors. We are super grateful to all of our supporters whose contributions enable us to offer our Ocean Festival events and activities free of charge to everyone who wants to participate. So there are no barriers to participation in any way, although we do always appreciate donations. A bit about the SCCA. We are a charitable nonprofit society with a mission to protect and restore biodiversity on the Sunshine Coast. We work across a region that is more than 2 million hectares of lands and waters from Howe Sound to Hamathko in the territories of the Squamish, the Shishak, Pliamin, Klahoose, and Homolko First Nations. The SCCA is deeply committed to reconciliation and respect for the rights and title of the First Nations whose territories we live and work and play and try to do conservation in. We deeply respect and value and draw inspiration from the profound connection, reverence and care, and long understanding of the ecosystems and the creatures, the connection between all living things, the lands and the waters and the species that the Indigenous people have, embraced and embodied. About World Oceans Day, we first began hosting these events in 2017, inspired by the United Nations World Oceans Day. In 1992, the UN designated June 8th as International World Oceans Day as a means to raise awareness of human impacts on our oceans and to build a global movement for ocean protection. Each year, people across the globe come together to share, learn, celebrate, and advocate for the health of our oceans. We are so happy to be part of that global movement with our Sunshine Coast Ocean Festival. This year, the festival program is really rich in content. We've got in-person and online screenings of really inspiring films, both feature films and short films, interactive citizen science and educational activities, advocacy initiatives, and of course, our Nemo Talk series. Our goal with all of this is to inspire, engage, and connect people and to encourage action to protect and restore the oceans we so love and depend on. Today, we are delighted to host our dear friend and community advocate, Dianne Sanford, to discuss her work on eelgrass, forage fish, and how to mitigate the impacts of human activities on these important species. Dianne is a passionate conservationist and naturalist with a lifelong curiosity about the natural world. Though now attempting a semi-retirement, which I'm not very happy about, she continues to make invaluable contributions to marine conservation on the Sunshine Coast. As the longtime volunteer coordinator for the Sunshine Coast Friends of Forage Fish, Dianne leads community-based monitoring of sand lance and surf smelt spawning beaches, a program she has stewarded for over a decade. She also brings years of experience mapping local eelgrass meadows, critical nursery habitats, which are critical habitats for many species. Locals will know Dianne from her 2 decades of as an education coordinator with DFO's Salmon in the Classroom program, where she inspired a generation of young ocean stewards. What else? Oh, you've served as a streamkeepers trainer for the Pacific Streamkeepers Federation, empowering citizens to take care of local waterways. Dianne acts as the SCCA's freshwater and marine liaison, she's just everywhere all the time and such an important part of marine conservation on the Sunshine Coast. So in today's presentation, Dianne will explore the vital connections between eelgrass, forage fish, and the health of our shorelines, how human activities are impacting these sensitive ecosystems, along with some ideas about how we can protect them. So welcome, Dianne, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm talking to you from Suisum, Roberts Creek, and I appreciate that I live here and work here and play here. So yeah, so I'm hoping we'll have some fun today. We'll talk and we'll have some fun. Okay, am I sharing my screen now?
Not yet.
Okay, is it there?
I don't.
Share. There we are.
There we go.
Being the technically challenged person I am, but that's okay. Okay, so here we are. Yes, so today I'm going to talk about things that have been near and dear to my life for many, many years, actually. So eelgrass and forage fish and human beings, okay? And talking a bit about how we can maybe get along, which would be really nice to see. Okay, I'm just going to start rolling. Okay, why is that not happening? So why is my page not moving? Let's see. That's really, there we go. Okay. So the two projects I'm speaking about today are the two most recent that I've done for the SCCA under contract, I guess. And it involves the area of the nearshore. So eelgrass mapping, which was for me a culmination of areas that I wanted to get done for many years. So it was wonderful. That is Seashell Inlet and Narrows and Salmon Inlets. So that finished that area off for me. The other thing I'm going to be speaking to is the forage fish monitoring and mapping, not mapping. So, well, yes, mapping because the sites that are positive are being mapped, which is awesome. Okay, so if you're having a look here, I don't know, can you see my cursor there? Okay, so when you're looking at the near shore area, you're looking at everything from the back shore down on the bottom to the foreshore and the intertidal zone, and then the subtidal zone. So basically, the subtidal zone begins at the low tide, okay? Your foreshore or intertidal zone begins at the highest high, okay? So the high water mark there. And that's the boundary. That is probably the area that experiences the most question and the most subjective definitions, okay, because it varies and because our high tide marks are over time changing, okay? So that leaves that bit of wiggle room, which always causes controversy. And then the backshore, which is basically the riparian zone. Okay, that's not happening again. We'll try it this way. That way works. Okay, so who lives where in the near shore? And this is totally relating to what we're talking about today. So this is a wonderful sketch done by Dan Pantella from Washington State Fish and Wildlife. He's retired now, but he did amazing things. He spent, I think, 35 years studying forage fish. So this is a really lovely illustration of what's going on. So you see your high water mark there, and then you see that in the high area, surf smelt. So that's where you get the high sandy area, that sand that gets deposited there. And just below it, because they like a bit coarser sand, is the sand lands. And we'll talk about these things individually so you know what I'm talking about, those of you that don't know already. Then you have that definition, that cobble boulder zone there, that's so common to our beaches. And then you have your zero tide, you can see here, and that's where your eelgrass begins to grow. Okay, so it doesn't like to be dried out. It likes wet always. And so you'll see that's the shallow barrier for eelgrass, and it's there. And then as you go further out, you have less light penetration, and so you start to get more of the algae. Okay. Looking at the fish that are in the area, you notice there's a note here that Dan put in. Oolakan and longfin smelt are anadromous, so they actually go into fresh water to spawn. The guys that we're talking about today, sand lance and surf smelt, are nearshore spawners. There's a whole whack of other forage fish that don't spawn near shore. So, such as the anchovy, which is pelagic out in open waters, and the herring as well, because they're subtidal. They're down here in the eelgrasses, or even down here where the red algae are. We can't access them safely. So, as a volunteer group, we stick to the two that had very little information in the past about their spawning and locations, and we stick to those so that we can go and we can sample. Okay. There we go. So the eelgrass mapping project, which we'll speak to first, was sponsored. The area, like I say, Seashell Inlet specifically, sponsored myself and my company, Moonstone Enterprises, going out to the Salmon and Narrows inlets and mapping those for absence or presence of eelgrass. That being done, it's done in a linear fashion because we had so many kilometers to cover, huge area. Second project is the Forage Fish Sampling Project. That was, it has been over time by the SEC been sponsored, and I'm now working as a volunteer coordinator. And this is the lower Sunshine Coast area. We are trying, we're on the lower Sunshine Coast. Pods up in Pender Harbor is taking care of that area. So it's really a nice complement that we have working together. And so that's surf lance, smelt and sand lance. Okay, and we'll start by talking eelgrass. This is a photo taken by Ramona de Graaf, my mentor, that taught us the original protocols and methodology for, oh, I'm taking that back. She did that original for forage fish, but just the same, the connection's so close, you'll find I get them mixed up all the time. Okay, there's a moon snail egg mass in an eelgrass bed. I just had to put that in there because I thought it was quite magnificent. Moon snails hang out in eelgrass beds. Really, they eat there, they spawn there. This is a mass of eggs that are laid in a secreted jelly-like mass that hardens with sand, of course, incorporated to hold it together. And they are very common in the sandy areas of beaches in certain areas where they still exist. So what is eelgrass? Some of you know this backwards, I hope, but it's a true plant. It's not an algae. Okay, so it's not a typical marine plant. It has not got the holdfast. The holdfast is that system that algae use to hang onto rocks. Eelgrass is a true plant. It actually has roots, like rhizome roots. Think about things like bamboo that run under the sand and then send up shoots. Okay, and that makes it quite unique. They say that historically, well, talking millennia ago, that eelgrass came into existence from, or I should say that the land grasses came into existence because of eelgrass. Okay, so seagrasses are worldwide. It's a true plant, not an algae, has many important functions. Okay, so eelgrass functions as a shelter, so for spawning, or not spawning, but for little out migrating smolts, the salmon smolts. They go out, they learn what to eat there, so they'll get their first foods in the ocean. They adapt to the ocean salt waters, and they have safe migration pattern from predators. Super important for them. Nursery for hundreds of different types of ocean life, and other things we'll discuss. It doesn't like heavy sedimentation. It can deal with light sedimentation and actually does a great job of dealing with it. But heavy sediments that begin to block sunlight penetration cause problems. It also doesn't like things like toxic runoff from land masses or from estuaries when you have things happening up river that come down the river and end up in the estuaries. Um, eelgrass does like to live in estuary areas on the outer perimeters where the water's not quite as brackish and a little saltier. And that's where all the deposition happens. And eelgrass just loves that sandy substrate and hangs in there. And the sad part about this, of course, is eelgrass is disappearing. Not just eelgrass, but seagrasses in general, at about 77% annually, worldwide. Okay, importance. Eelgrass is a carbon sink. Carbon is sequestered in the substrate and in the plants. So when they're catching those sediments, they're settling them down to the substrate, and they are, what would you say? You would say they're conglomerating, or they're amalgamating that into the substrate. And eelgrass is also a stabilizer and wave buffer. So think about putting a carpet on a mountainside, or on a hillside. And what does that do? Like when you see core matting put on places, it slows down the movement of water. And so when you have ocean storms happening with a heavy wave action, if you have an eelgrass bed offshore, it actually buffers that movement and some of that power. So it provides oxygen. Being a true plant, it does the same thing. It's oxygen and then carbon dioxide, does the switchovers. It indicates ocean health in the fact that by its very existence, shows scientists especially that it's a healthy area. It has to be a certain amount of water clarity and water purity before it can survive. And that, once again, a trap for suspended materials. For ocean life, once again, breeding, feeding, nursery habitat, corridor, transition zone for salmonids, and oxygen provider and water purifier. New science on that one. So in Malaysia, a study's just been done, well, in the last few years, speaking to the fact that water contaminated with E. coli is actually purified by eelgrass because there was no E. coli found in one region that had eelgrass, and right next to it, it was quite prolific. So it's an interesting benefit. This is getting local. This is McLean Bay and Seashell Inlet. A nice, healthy eelgrass bed. In the past, I've been involved with restoration work, and this is one area where we did a small bed of eelgrass in an area that needed it, and it worked beautifully. So it now is a continuous bed, whereas it was a bed with a gap in the past. Why do we care? Well, blue carbon, 10% of our ocean carbon sequestration is eelgrass. Okay, so when you're looking at eelgrass beds, you're looking at a great source of sequestration and diversity of life and food. You see on this little chart in here, it's not giving you some of the species. So there's about, well, just under 400 species. And this is not a new diagram. These are utilizers of eelgrass bed areas. And ecosystem services, I don't particularly like putting money values on things, but there are people that do. So I think the chart says 81,000, but the latest numbers, or the more recent numbers, are $87,000 per hectare per year in the Salish Sea. Okay, so in that area. Okay, and there's our lovely little picture of some, looks like coho smolts heading out. So the salmonids depend on the eelgrass for food and shelter and adjusting to this salt environment. Okay, vulnerability of eelgrass, shading. Okay, so that's where humans come in. So shading weakens and eventually kills eelgrass. Examples of shading are docks and swim floats and excess sedimentation in the water, in the ocean. Mooring buoys, okay, they cause scouring in a circular pattern around their anchorages, causing fragmentation of eelgrass beds. So when you're setting an anchor or you're or setting say a permanent area, there has to be a certain amount of chain before you have your rope going up, and that is just deadly. So that's something we'll discuss a bit more. Herbicide and pesticide runoff from land is, of course, not good in volumes that can be reaching the eelgrass beds. Dredging, of course, is a physical removal. Fragmenting beds, like breaking the continuous nature of a bed, will diminish the overall vitality of the bed. So if you see a patchy bed, as I've seen, you know that that's not particularly a healthy bed. So mapping, okay, here on the coast has been going on since, wow, the early I'm going to say 1990s, but probably 2002 or three, we began. So why did we start? Well, I started because I had this really love of the nearshore area, and used to take kids out, our kids, out on a dinghy over eelgrass beds out at Roberts Bank of all places. Anyway, so why here? Well, because when I met mentor of mine, actually, Nikki Wright, in the past, way back in 2000, that was her thing. She was with the SeaChange Marine Conservation Society, and that was it. We clicked. Here, we discovered that there was little or no knowledge of eelgrass beds, other than local knowledge, of course, the seashell people. But locally, you asked a person about eelgrass, and they often didn't know anything about it. Where? Well, our goal was from Pender Harbor down to Langdale, basically, to map, which was a big area. And how? So we started out with kayaks and canoes, believe it or not, and visual. And something here, maybe, I don't know if you'll see this, you probably won't, I'll show you after, is very, what would you say, very basic device to looking into the water. How we have done it in more recent years is with boat, with depth sounder, Bruno, underwater camera, and GPS. So we're getting the positions, we're getting the quality of the bed, the density, and we're getting a look at the surrounding habitat a bit too. So in 2018, we did eelgrass mapping in Seashell Inlet, the main section. And there was very little done prior to this, other than the mapping in Porpoise Bay that we started in the early 2000s. 22, 23, we mapped off the shores of Roberts Creek, Weesum, and in order to determine changes since previous mapping. So since some of that early mapping that we did, wanted to see, excuse me, what the changes were. And in 2024, which was the latest, eelgrass was mapped in the two inlets, the Salmon and Narrows inlets, finishing off the mapping of Seashell Inlet. And this was done with under contract to the SCCA, who have been my, what would you say, my benefactors over the years. Okay, and here, this is the Seashell Inlet. This is actually the last stretch, which was Narrows and Salmon Inlets. And our goal with this one was to involve the public. So unfortunately, we were limited to how many people we could take out just by saying, okay, we will do a different person every day we go out. And I think our mapping took place over about 2 weeks. There were a few runs where we couldn't get out due to weather, and there was other times when there were other issues, but we basically had about 10 days of good weather, good access, safe access, so that we could take people out with us. And so we would take one person, we would train them up, we give them the safety spiel, show them the data pages, and take them out for a day. Our days ranged from a full day to a few hours, and all, weather dependent. And so there's a couple of our volunteers we had. The goal for that was to expand, people's knowledge of what eelgrass is about, and to just let them experience. Some people hadn't even been up the inlet that far to see the inlet, narrows and salmon inlets. And okay, so here's an idea of what this looks like. Someone I don't think I mentioned too much is the SERD. This SERD mapping folks have been incredibly helpful over the years. We had an agreement, a good number of years, that they would do my mapping. And so they have, and it's been wonderful. This on the left you'll see is what one of the maps look like. And the yellow you see are the points. And some of those smaller ones are the lines, which means a bed that's long enough to be delineated with a line. And sometimes it's a bit of both. So these are points and these are lines of eelgrass. And this is actually Gustafson Bay in Salmon Inlet. And on the right is a picture of that area. So interesting thing, of course, that we have with the inlet in general is that it's fjord area, and fjord has very steep slopes, especially the two salmon and narrows inlets, and they have very small available habitat because of light penetration. So when you got a deep, you got a 30-foot drop within a few feet of shore, or a few, with a couple of meters of shore, then you're going to have a very narrow band, and that's all you're going to get. But that hadn't been mapped, so it was important. This is an older map. This is a map that Cheryl Trent did for me years ago, ending in, it was April 2004 to 2012. But you see those lines, those are starting way up at Saginaw, coming down and doing the basics in mapping, coming down these colored lines. Some of them are the BCMCA, that's the British Columbia Marine Conservation Atlas work. They did overhead flights. That's not the most accurate. What we wanted to do is we wanted to get the accuracy. So we were working hard on that. Porpoise Bay itself is a huge, well, not so much now, but was a huge eelgrass bed. Human impacts, marinas, blah, 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 have changed that somewhat, but it was historically a huge bed. And this just gives you an idea of where we were looking at, right down to Gibson's and over on Keats. Okay, and this is Salmon Inlet, 2018, magnificent bed, one of the few huge beds in the inlets, other than Porpoise Bay, of course. And let's switch gears. Let's go to forage fish. I hope you've got lots of questions for me now. Forage fish are the cornerstone of our food web. They are abundant, schooling, food for everybody, including humans. Yeah, they're just super important little critters. For me, I became fascinated with them out fishing when I was a girl with my father. And we'd be out in the ocean and we'd see these herring balls, or we would see other things. And we, assumed they were all herring. That being said, I soon found out with the underwater camera that there are many balls of many forage fish, and they're not necessarily herring. And they're sweevies, by the way. The Seashell Nation have that word, as well as other coast Salish people. Okay, and there they are. So there's the surf smelt on the top, slightly bigger, more comparable in size and body shape to a herring. And the bottom, the sandlands. They were also known as needlefish. Okay. And here we have a picture that I got from Will Dogood. Great. He's out at UVic and has some magnificent research that he's done on sandlats. And here's a picture of the spawning areas. So I put this in so you can get an idea of where we go when we go sampling. So there's two areas. You can see the arrows here. So what you've got here is your high tide. What you've got here is what they call a oh, what is that? It's the shell hash line. That word escaped me there for a minute. Yeah, so shell hash is this white residue, comes in with the tides. You can see it here as well. Comes in with the tides, and is deposited. Okay, so you're looking at your high where you've got rack, so that's residue, wood materials, and seaweed, and then these other two lines where you have the lighter material that's deposited. Okay, so in this area here, the first line is generally speaking where you got sand lance spawning. They like the finer sand, easier for them to dig in. And then the surf smelt are in the coarser area. Welcome Beach. This was a positive for Pacific sandlance, and you can see that's fairly fine sand. And here we have some scientists at work. This was, I guess that was Hopkins. And here is more recently the crew at Trail Bay Beach. And that was in December when we had a positive. And this is what we're looking for. So this grid here is 1 millimeter square. And this little egg right here is a Pacific sandlance. So you can actually see the embryo there. And another identifying characteristic is that oil sac, okay, inside. These little guys, when you're looking at them under a microscope, the team that is doing the volunteer work also has one or two people that will take the sample, which is collected here, okay, and you transect 30 meters, and you collect that sand sample and you winnow it, which is over here in this little, we would put it through 3 screens first, coarse, medium, and fine screens, and then it goes through the vortex, which is really like a gold panning item, and it's got a little pump. You put the sifted down to fine, which is just a bit smaller than the 1 millimeter. So we're going to catch those eggs hopefully, and it reduces the sample down. Then we reduce it down even more with that vortex, and then it goes to the lab. And hopefully the lab sample is only 3 to 4 tablespoons. Okay, so this is all, once again, just a recap on schooling fishes, including herring, capelin, anchovy, ulican, and others. There are many more too. So there's a very large group of forage fish. And they're intertidal spawners, the two that we deal with, and they use the sand pea gravel size. The juveniles, this is where connection comes in, after hatching, rear in nearshore areas. And there is a correlation, there's been a few studies done on that, about these hatchlings, these little juveniles, after they hatch in the sand, and they have attachments. So the egg of the sand lance will be covered in sand grains. And that's what keeps it down in the cool substrate so that it will hatch and be healthy, and then head out and then go out to eelgrass beds. That's a great cover for them. So that is a preferred one. And there is a correlation between the presence of eelgrass beds offshore and the presence of forage fish. So it's very cool. Okay, and they're easy to sample because they're in the intertidal zone. And we've been around for 15 years or so on various beaches. And at the last of this page is the Coastal Forage Fish Network, which is a new network. It is been around, I guess, for five plus years now. We are a member of that group because it is great to have a conglomeration of folks like-minded and sharing information. And there's some anchovy that we spotted off Granthams Landing at one point. There was a mass of them. They are not shoreline spawners, but I figured looking at these guys that they were driven inland or inshore by the multitude of sea lions, seals. There were thousands of gulls, it seemed, hundreds anyway, ducks, geese, otters, you name it. And it was just a feast. It was an amazing sight. I hope some of you have been able to see that. And so now we get to the human connection. How are we doing? Oh, I better get talking here. So the human connection, we're coming to our closing here. Eelgrass and forage fish require certain conditions for survival. We know that what we do affects these nearshore residents. And we're talking fish here and eelgrass. Okay, so how we affect eelgrass. Boat moorage in eelgrass beds, and I'll show you an example in a minute. Log boom storage over eelgrass. Not so much now. In the past, back in the early days when we were starting, log boom sites were where we started looking for restoration work to do because it devastates eelgrass beds. Logs are no longer stored, usually in estuaries, which was a prime place for eelgrass, which is great. An easy fix, an easy change with education. Watershed impacts, logging upriver, that impacts flows into estuaries. So if there's heavy sediment runoff of cleared areas upstream, it comes down and it can be just too much for the system. And it comes down and it comes in a major plume and it hits the eelgrass beds that are off to the side of the main channel when it's in the estuary. Clearing of vegetation along shoreline and upland. So with development of more and more houses right on the waterfront, we got slow movement with vegetation. We got quicker movement over clear, paved, hardened areas. And yeah, and so that's where we need shoreline regulation. Pulling eelgrass up because it's yucky to swim in. Believe it or not, when we were speaking to shoreline owners, because of course that's a very big part of doing any restoration, we actually were told that you don't have eelgrass there, or you don't want it there, or you don't replant it there because it's yucky to swim in. And of course, the last one, toxic runoffs, and they can be in many, many forms. It can be chemicals. It can be, things used in golf courses, things we use not thinking about where and why we're using them, and killers like glyphosate for unwanted plant species. Here is circular scouring caused by boat anchors with no midnight line float. So remember earlier I referred to the 6 feet or 2 meters of anchor chain you have, and then you have your rope. If you don't have something to float that line up, that anchor acts as a giant scour. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing all the circular scours that are caused by boat anchors. And that's devastating for, yes, eelgrass, but also other things on the substrate. Okay, and this is what a midline anchoring system looks like. You see it's as simple as putting in a float. Okay, and so it lifts that, and it has enough flotation to bring up that chain as well. That would probably run to about somewhere in here. So it's simple, and it is becoming more commonly used. Some folks over on in Mannion Bay on Bowen Island are switching over, which is great. Okay, and how we affect shoreline forage fish. Shoreline squeeze, sea level rise, storm intensities, encroachment of ocean waters and shorelines. And with that happens scouring. Okay, so you have intensified storms, scouring the waves hitting the shore and scouring the sand out. So that is a big thing for forage fish because they need that sand. Armoring is another one, and that is intensity. When you have the wave hitting a wall, that intensity is once again directed down and then carrying out the substrate. And encroachment of structures. That is especially, it's detrimental for many things, but it's mainly for shading eelgrass beds. And, depending, people often ask me when we're down on the beach forage fish sampling, well, we're walking on this. Is that a problem? No, it's not, because these are hardy little suckers. It's the best way to put it. And so they are pretty darn good at surviving. And there are other factors as well as hardening or armoring that affect shoreline habitats, so buildings and moving and riprap and all those sorts of things. Okay, there we have a lovely photo of Bob Turner's that he's let me use of anchovy in Howe Sound. So those numbers are increasing, which is a wonderful thing. And what can we do? Okay, educate yourself. That I think is the big one. What I would love to see in my dream world is that every homeowner that buys on the Sunshine Coast or anywhere on the shoreline, period, gets a brochure at least saying, okay, this is where you're near or this is where you're on, and this is what's important and sensitive, and please consider it. So learn what coexists with you in your neighborhood. Be mindful wherever you live, whether near shore or upland. And like I say, with a reminder like that and some education, it might get people's curiosity up so that they will make informed, mindful decisions about vulnerable areas. And ensure your local OCP, official community plan, embraces the sensitive near shores. Yeah, I was involved in the Roberts Creek OCPC for a good number of years, was a chair for a while, and Roberts Creek, Weesum, has a development permit area over all of our shoreline, which is important. And once again, refer to known information. And there's a link to the SCRD mapping. It is wonderful. The mapping department has, like I say, they've mapped all of the information I've given them, and they've produced these beautiful maps. And there is coming up on forage fish positive spawning areas on the PSF marine data site, which is the last one down there. They're coming. There's, I think, only one area that we have positive mark on there. There will be more. They are coming, but you can find them there, what there is on the coast in the entire Salish Sea. That's, and these are other, what you would say, sites you can have a look at with jurisdictions and nature-based solutions and coastal squeeze and all of that. And there we are. I'm going to take us now to our thank you screen. And there we are. There's our little logo. So thank you. And also SCRD mapping. My bad. I don't have their logo there, but they have been integral in all of this work.
So true. Thank you so much, Dianne, for your presentation and for just like your decades of work on these important issues and the tiny things that people don't see that are right under our feet. It's I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen if you don't mind.
Yep.
And this I was recently out with you and the crew doing forage fish sampling on the beach at Armour's, and it was really fun to watch people come up and go, whoa, what are you doing, what, and see the see the images, and that question of, oh my gosh, we're walking on them, it was really funny, because I had the same feeling, like, they're so tiny and fragile, and no, actually they're hardy little suckers, like you said. So
Yep.
uh,
Yep, they are.
I've learned so many amazing things from you and this work that you do. And I think one of the things that is super important for people to recognize that we don't always is just the benefits that we get as people, like when you talked about how eelgrass buffers the impact of increased impact on the shorelines, and it's basically like protecting the
Mhm.
shores from degradation and from that encroachment of the ocean on the waterfront. And yeah, it's so many ways, not just in the ecosystem and supporting all the other little critters. So it's always fascinating. I always learn something new whenever you give a new talk. So we're going to move into the sort of Q&A part of the conversation. And just for everybody, please, if you have a question and you want to raise your hand, the little, if you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, that makes it a lot easier for me to see you. Or if you have a question, you can pop it into the chat and I will ask it for you if you don't want to ask it yourself.
Mhm.
And we have, so let's see, we've got Aaron Balfour has asked, has anyone tried snorkeling to monitor for herring at the depth they're found, as mentioned? Do you know of anything like that, Diane?
Um, yeah, I mean, DFO, Aaron has done monitoring for herring via diving for years. So, but only herring, right? Um, so yes, actually, snorkeling, um, for forage fish, not so much, because these guys, especially the focus surf smelt and sandlance, are on the near shore where they're spawning. There is recorded footage of that actually happening. In fact, I could probably give you a link to that. Um, I'm just trying to think of where I've got that, and it's a fellow that underwater, does underwater videos and in shallow areas and has the video of the forage fish spawning, and they burrow actually right into the sand and lay their eggs and then come popping out of the sand. So that's where they like the nice loose sand. Um, Snorkeling to look at eelgrass now is another story because yes, people have done snorkeling to delineate the edges of beds when you're doing polygons. And I think that might have answered your question.
We've got a couple
Terry
other
Brown.
questions.
That's right. Thank you, Sarama. Terry Brown, the amphibiographer, or whatever he calls himself. And yeah, Terry L. Brown. You could Google Terry L. Brown and you can find that little video, which is wonderful, of the spawning sandlance. And one thing I didn't mention, by the way, is the egg of the surf smelt is slightly bigger. So it's 1.1 millimeters instead of 0.75 to 1, which is the surf or the sandlance. But the surf smelt has a little attachment to the sand grain, and that is how you differentiate it, one of the ways, from the sandlance. So that little, I call it a peduncle, which is it's like the egg, and it has a it's like a peduncle. The salmon has a peduncle too, right? Which is between the body and the tail, that narrowing. Well, that peduncle attaches it to a single grain of sand, and that's it. And that holds it down in that sand for the period of time that it needs to incubate it into sand, even during low tide when it's dry, but it's got damp sand, and that'll do it.
Wow. So we had a question about how far back does the data on eelgrass go? Were you the first person to map the inlets? Just wondering about, shifting baselines,
Right.
how much information
Right.
we
Um,
started with, basically.
yeah. So the Seashell Nation has information that I couldn't tell you how far back it goes. I don't know. They shared with me information from 2008. And that's all I have. When I started looking at what data was out there, it appeared that for this area, ours was the first. So yeah, interesting that there wasn't, I mean, yes, herring spawn surveys, but nothing to do with anybody else because herring is only one of many forage fishes, right? So food for everybody. Um, so I want to say that eelgrass data, probably, well, as far as I knew, probably 1999 was the beginning. But I'm sure that there must have been other curious people out there doing bits and pieces, but nothing that was on a central database. Okay, so one of the first databases was the Community Mapping Network, and the Community Mapping Network folks started the idea of amalgamating all of the information, which is super important.
Yeah, and the SCRD's done a really good job, like you said, of collate, housing that data now and making it accessible for
Yeah.
for
Yeah, all that data is open portal.
Yeah.
So that means anyone can go and have a look at it. And if you choose to have a look, go into sea layers, and then from sea layers, tick on environment, and then under environment, there's eelgrass, and there's, I think, something else, which I don't recall.
Yeah, we should, at the end of the talk, usually we grab all the sort of links of the information that filtered out and we pop it up on on the website page for your talk.
Perfect.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how the local government can help protect these important habitats through. We've got an official community plan update happening right now in the Sunshine Coast Regional District, so like across the whole of the lower coast except for the town of Gibsons and Seashelt, but also Seashelt is doing their OCP update and Gibsons is doing some environmental updates too. So like
Right.
basically we've got this massive local government planning happening right now. And
Mhm.
so how can we influence in a good way that planning process to help protect these habitats?
Become involved. Um, Super important to become involved and to point out the important um, points, about the community plans because, if you're in an area that has any seashore, and I mean, every area has seashore, varying degrees, um, you need to make sure that the community plans, you know, involve themselves, is involved in those plans so that the sensitive areas are protected. Like I say, it would be lovely to see DPAs on all of the coastal areas, every single one of them, because we are blessed with quite a bit of shoreline and development permit areas don't they are not the end be all and end all because there are gaps, of course, such as variances. But if the community plans involve sensitivity to areas like riparian areas, not just ocean, but river areas, riparian zones, then we have something to at least put an extra step before something happens that may be detrimental.
Yeah,
So,
you mentioned before that you wished, if in your dream world you wish that the regional district would have a brochure and every waterfront property owner would get a brochure to
yes.
explain to them what the near shore looks like. And a couple of years ago we had District of Seashell planner Marina Stepovich. She came and she gave us a presentation and a Nemo talk about that they've got a foreshore DPA, a development permit area, which basically is a constraint on any development that makes the homeowners, have to consider and do not do some things if it
Yeah.
could cause harm
Yeah.
to the nearshore
Yeah.
environment for that. And so I'm
Yeah.
really hoping that, I mean, and that's great. That's the District of Seashell leading the way
Mhm.
in that place. And I'm kind of hoping that through the regional district's OCP update, they
Mhm.
will be able to learn from, take that kind of an example and apply it in the Sunshine Coast Regional District as well
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
town.
Well, that would be, yeah, in a dream world, that would be ideal to have that, and that's about, being sensitive to all the concerns, and I think once again, I also point to riparian because what happens upstream affects downstream. So, we need to be looking at all riparian, and riparian just referring to influence by water, whether it's fresh or salt. So, yeah, um, we need to really be sensitive in this planning process. And as far as what we can do, we can get involved. We can just make the time to become involved, you know?
And raise it, right? Like, I mean, the thing about community planning is that if you don't speak up about it, if you don't raise the issue, then, the government doesn't really even know that you care about it. And
That's
so,
right.
even though we always feel like the government should be doing all the things,
Yeah.
it's often the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. So, we've got a question from Aaron. Has Green Shores had a presence on the Sunshine Coast?
Yes, Green Shores has way back when. I have an example. It's down here at the estuary of Roberts Creek. Green Shores came in way in their early days and set an example of a beach that was left by a homeowner in its original state. Okay, so what happened at the estuary is a couple of homes right on the west side um, put up riprap walls, right? So once again, you have this, activity going on out there. It's getting worse. You're getting bigger storms, and terror sets in that you're going to lose all your property, or you could lose your house, whatever. So anyhow, these walls came in, and Green Shores people, I guess, were they wanted a prototype. Roberts Creek actually was a prototype for one of their policies. So they came in and they talked to this one property owner next to these huge riprap walls and said, "You have a natural shoreline right now, and can we help you keep it?" And so they said, "Sure," because this was a freebie for them. And so they property, how can I explain it? So it's level with a gentle slope out to the ocean. It's the same cobble beach as all of the properties have, except that above that cobble, you had the coarser sand and the fine sand. Down around the corner where the riprap was, the coarse sand and the fine sand were gone. So a living example of what happens when you harden a shore. So that riprap, even though it was on an angle and even though it had water flow around it because it was open, was enough to change the dynamic of the water movement.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like one of the things we don't do very well is communicate these concepts and
yeah,
help people understand. Like you're actually harming your own property and your own property value, even if you're not really concerned about the environment. Like you're making things worse for yourself by doing those massive, hardscaping on the foreshore.
right.
Yeah. So we've got Denise had a couple questions. First, does eelgrass mapping have any political power for protection of beds? So that's the first one. When you replant eelgrass, do you use seeds or pieces of eelgrass? And then what about possible training for real estate agents to offer more information before you purchase? So sort of the whole context of how to
Okay,
how to train and how do you inform
right.
and enforce.
So, yeah, let's start with the first part. So, under the Fisheries Act, eelgrass is a sensitive habitat. Okay, so that means that it is protected under the Fisheries Act. Um, does it happen in reality? Maybe if somebody complains enough, or if enough people complain. Um, that's my opinion on it anyway. But it is a sensitive habitat, so it has been recognized as such. So that's a wonderful first step. Um, Now, what we're expanding on that?
The next question was, well, we'll go to this one first. What about possible training for real estate agents to offer information before people purchase?
Well, that would be a wonderful thought as well. So, my take on that would be you are buying into a sensitive area. You need to know about this. And here are some of the things available out there that you can research, or to make it more simple, present it all, you know? If that was part of a purchase agreement, that would be, yeah, that would be so important and so effective, I would think. Um,
Wow.
but that being said, um, is it going to happen? I don't know.
Well, that's a really great idea, though. I'm going to write that one down because, I mean, the Real Estate Foundation of BC does projects around things like this. And
Yeah,
suddenly I'm thinking to myself, if we got a real estate body to take this on to
yeah,
help create policy, that could
yeah.
be huge, actually. Wow, great. That's
Yeah.
a really cool idea, Denise. And then the last was it was a question about when you're replanting eelgrass, do you use seeds or pieces of eelgrass? Like how does that work?
Right. So when we're replanting, and I guess Denise, you haven't been um, involved because I was just going to say We, in the past, when we were doing restoration, to answer the question in 2 words is it's a shoot. It's a shoot that's been harvested by a diver. So replanting is, yeah, taking from that long rhizome plant, physically making a break in that rhizome root that has a nice frond on it, and taking that with the root and then taking it and putting it into bundles, taking it ashore where volunteers came to thread those shoots with washers. So you take a washer and you attach it with a little tie, twist tie, and so you've got your frond, you've got your washer, and you've got your roots. And then those are taken and put into bundles of 10, and then they're taken into baskets of 100, and those baskets are then taken and hand planted. So very labor intensive, very expensive. I was involved with a project from 2017 to 2022 with Nikki Wright, SeaChange Marine Conservation Society, where we were doing restoration work in Seashell Inlet. And that's what we did. So we would actually, a lot of the forage fish folks at that period of time came out to do that washing as well. And yeah, and so it's fairly effective. It's actually probably the most effective up to this point method to replant. On the east coast of Canada, they've been doing a lot of work with seed. So eelgrass reproduces in 3 methods. It has seeds and pollen, and you can actually see that pollen floating on the water in the spring sometimes. And then the second way is by shoots breaking off and floating off, and then finding a good spot and rooting themselves. And then seeds, yeah. And the third way is just by spreading. So the mother plant will just send out those rhizome roots. For one mother plant can have a huge bed, sort of like thinking about that monster mushroom that has all those micro rhizomes under the soil. Same idea, that mother plant has all of these tendrils going out for such a distance, and they from time to time will break and they will start a new bed. And so those are the 3 reproductive manage methods. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else?
I'm just looking. Well, Sarama did share a link to Terry Brown's Wiggly Fish
Good.
video on Vimeo, which is awesome. We'll pop that onto the
Good.
website once we're done. But I think we've gone a little bit over time. We got right into this, Dianne, and so
Okay.
we've gone over time. So I think we're gonna wrap it up. But before we go, I just wanted to. I'm gonna mention this, like, a big part of what we are trying to do with these talks is to inform and inspire and educate, and also, to encourage people to do something, take some action. So sort of 3 things that I came away from this talk with, that people can do when they leave is get involved in the official community plan update and make sure that, as part of that process, we really communicate to local government that these values are important and why, and that we want them to ensure that these sensitive habitats are protected. Another one is talk to your neighbors and your real estate agents about the fact that, like, these things matter and we want them to take it seriously too.
Mhm.
And the third one, of course, is volunteer with Dianne and the eelgrass mapping and the restoration work and the forage fish sampling projects. Like this, you have done such an amazing job of educating and informing while doing the citizen science. And it's just so, so important. We need people who can take the message out and the work out once you retire, and I cry. So this is ongoing and enduring community work that is really important. And so just huge thanks to you, Dianne, for all that you do, for inspiring us and for keeping this going. um, you've been a fundamental part of the work,
Mm.
this work too, including the Ocean Festival stuff. Like, we started this together with you. You were helping us get Nemo talks and all of it. So it's just, big hands up to Dianne Sanford for
Mm.
all that you do. And I'm just gonna sort of do some festival promotion here. We've got
Okay.
Cool
One
Short.
second.
Yes.
Yep. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming today, including the folks that are already in the Forage Fish sampling group. Okay.
Thank you for doing that. We
Okay.
appreciate you. Yep. So that's the end of our talk for today. We've got tomorrow's Nemo talk. We will have more about another forage fish. Elika Cairns, the project director from the Atkatsum Howe Sound Marine Stewardship Initiative, is going to come and speak with us about the vital role of herring, or schlout, I think is how you say that in the Squamish language. And discover how we can get involved in learning more about that and mapping the herring in Howe Sound. We've got tonight our second and final live film screening of Chasing Coral at the in Seashelt at the Sunshine Coast Arts Center, and a whole bunch of other really great community events. Encourage everybody to check out the website, come and hang out and celebrate World Oceans Day with us on June 8th at Mission Point Park for the last day of our festival. And do visit the website, check out the other Nemo talks, and stay involved. Thanks everybody for coming, and happy Oceans Week.